Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this CHAMPS event. Happy Friday, nearly the weekend. We'll get there eventually. My name's Helen Bromley. I'm the Director of Public Health for Cheshire West and Chester, and I have the privilege of chairing today's session. So this is an hour and a half long session looking at various aspects of coaching, which I'm sure we all could use a refresher on and improve our own coaching skills. So just a very warm welcome to you all our colleagues across Cheshire and Merseyside. We're from lots of different fields and specialties, and it's a pleasure to have you here with us today. We would like to encourage you to engage with the event by using our hashtag on social media, so that's hashtag public health coaching. And also we will be recording the session apart from the breakout rooms, so we can share that recording with you after the event. There's a lot of us on the call this morning and we're not going to be able to manage hands for questions. So what I'd suggest you do is, if you've got any comments or questions, put them into the chat and we'll pick them up as we go along, and we'll manage the questions and the feedback that way. Just in terms of the event, it's a CHAMPS Connect and Learn event. This is an opportunity for us to come together and learn something new and connect with colleagues, as I've said, across the Cheshire and Mersey patch. It's always great to see so many people on the call and so willing to give up your time to these valuable events. So thank you. And also allowing Cheshire and Mersey to strengthen its public health collaborative. We are champs, all of us on this call. It's not just the team sitting in Wirral these days, it's all of us. We are what makes champs. So, you know, it's our contributions as well that form such a vibrant community in Cheshire and Merseyside. And we want to strengthen this collaborative to improve health outcomes and tackle inequalities. So just by way of introduction to the session, and following a pilot last year, we identified a recommendation to create a coaching culture across the patch. And this is the first step in introducing the concept and some core skills linked to coaching. So what we hope to do is provide you all with a reflective learning space to develop our coaching skills. We guarantee that you'll leave today with the tools to self-coach, peer coach, and coach teams. And alongside this programme, we'll run a programme of CPD events that will all be promoted in Collaborate, our monthly newsletter. So we're really, really lucky today to have Shirley Gaston with us. Welcome, Shirley. It's an absolute privilege to have you on the call. Shirley's got over 25 years specialising in experiential learning and working with dynamic market-leading companies. Shirley's highly accomplished and a versatile facilitator and coach, delivering a spectrum of leadership, management and team development, as well as coaching and strategic and organisational development, with an emphasis on employee engagement. So as you can see, big smiley face there on Shirley. She's friendly, warm, professional, enthusiastic, confident, and has an informal delivery style. So we're all really looking forward to this morning. Shirley will make everything interesting and easy to assimilate into our long-term memories. There's nothing wrong with my long-term memory. It's the short-term memory that's the problem, but maybe that's age-related. But she does this because of her determination to make every aspect of the programme active, interactive and participative. So don't be backwards in coming forwards, folks. Have your say, use the chat bar. Use the hashtag and let's generate some energy around all of this morning. So it just remains for me to hand over to Shirley to take us through the rest of the session. So Shirley, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Helen, and welcome everybody. So as Helen's mentioned, I'm Shirley from Azesta. The experiential learning company that I founded spends a lot of time helping people to develop their coaching skills, become coaches, become good coach managers and get coaching qualifications. So we're just going to have a really short session this morning where we're going to look at what is coaching and what are some of the key skills. And we're going to look at the GROW model, which I imagine a lot of you are familiar with. But first of all, we're actually going to start off reasonably experientially, because I'm going to give you an opportunity to be coached by me. And for this, you are going to need to have a pen, a paper. I think we told you to have this before, but hopefully that's possible. We might need to go and get one now. And also some sort of issue in mind that I'm going to coach you around. So I'm just going to share my slides just for a second. I'm going to take them off for just to remind you what coaching is, first of all. So hopefully, a super useful skill because you can use it at home, at work, with friends, with colleagues. And it basically, as John Whitmore said, is unlocking people's potential to maximize their performance. So it's helping them get clearer about their thinking, decide what they want to do and achieve and how they're going to do it. So what's not to like, really? So the first thing that's going to happen, it's called silent coaching, but I've put that in inverted commas because I'm not going to be silent, unfortunately for you. But I'm going to be coaching all of you at the same time, which means basically that I'm going to be asking you a series of questions to help you structure your thinking about an issue or problem or challenge that you've got at the moment. And this is the hard bit for me actually, but in the gaps between the questions, I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to think about my own issue, challenge or problem and jot some things down about that. So the first thing that I need you to do is, if you've got your pen and paper, write down in a sentence the issue that you want to think about. So it could be a problematic relationship with someone at work. It could be there's something that you've been procrastinating around that you really want to get done and achieve. It could be that you want to move house or that you want to sort the spare room out. But I'm looking for you to think about an issue that is important to resolve, but not too emotionally intense, because you are effectively, with my help and support through the questions, going to be self-coaching through this challenge or issue. So I'll take the slide off and come back to those afterwards, just so that I can see a few more faces. So have you written down the issue that you wish to think about? I needed a little bit of nodding. Okay. So we're going to be structuring these questions into 4 sections that we'll talk about more what they were a little bit later in the morning. But otherwise, let's get started. Now, you might need to adapt the question slightly to fit your issue, because obviously I'm asking 20 questions and it's going to be the same questions for all of you, no matter what the issue is. So if you need to adapt it a little bit, that's fine. But basically, you don't need to write the question down, but each time I ask you a question, I just need you to write down the answer. So you've got the issue in mind, you've got it written down, hopefully. Let us begin. Question 1. In a nutshell, what are you trying to achieve? Jot that down. Question 2. Imagine that you have successfully addressed your issue. What does success look like? Question 3. What does success feel like? Question 4. What do you really, really want? Okay, after you've finished answering that question, draw a line across the page or a dotted line or something just to show that we're getting into a different section now, and we're going to get a bit more into the detail of this issue. So question 5, what is going on that makes this an issue for you? Question 6, and you might have answered this a little bit, but who is involved and how? Question 7, what assumptions are you making? Question 8, what, if anything, have you already done to address this situation? What have you already done? Question 9, what is the effect or impact of what you've done so far? When you've finished answering that question, it's time to draw another line or do some dashes or just delineate that section, and we're moving into the third of 4 parts. And the first question in this section 3, number 10, is, I'm going to give you a little while for this one. What options do you have? List as many as you can. Question 11. What else might you do? I know I said as many options as you could come up with, but you need to come up with one more now. What else might you do? Question 12 is an interesting one. If you had absolutely no constraints of time, of money, or power or health, what would you do? Might have to say that one again. If you had absolutely no constraints of time, money, power, or health, what would you do?
When you ask that question, do you mean, I know it's probably how we interpret it, but do you mean on this particular issue, or do you mean in general, in life in general?
On this particular issue, Jane.
Okay, thank you.
And also with my favourite question, number 13 now, also with this particular issue. If you had, maybe you've got one, a really wise friend, what would they do in your shoes? Question 14, last one in this section. If your best friend were in this situation, what advice would you give them? Okay, after that, it's time to draw a line across the page as we move into the final section. And question 15 is, from your list of options that you've generated over the last few questions, which options will you actually pursue? You might want to asterisk them, underline them, or write them out separately.
Sorry, Shirley, is it just one option we need to focus on?
I did say which options will you actually pursue? So there might be only one, but there might be 2 or 3.
Okay, great. I wasn't quite sure if you had heard an S or not. Thank you.
Question 16, this is kind of a continuation, but for each chosen option, whether 1 or 2 or 3, what specifically will you do? Get more specific about it. Question 17, what help or support will you need? Question 18, what deadlines will you set for yourself? Penultimate question, what is the first step you will take? And the final question is a very easy one, because it's just a number. Write down on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being not at all and 10 being definitely, how committed are you to taking that step? And an interesting little bit of research for you. If you've written 8, 9 or 10, you're really likely to do it. And if you've written anything less than an 8, it's quite likely that you won't and may continue to procrastinate on the issue. So if you have got less than an 8, you maybe need to think to yourself a supplementary question. What would need to change for that to be an 8? But what I would like to know now, because we've asked all 20 of our questions, is what was the effect of these questions? There's quite a lot of you, so you can shout out, but maybe put something in the chat if you prefer. What was the effect or impact of these questions on you, maybe, or on the way that you are thinking about the issue or challenge or problem or goal? Getting some good things in the chat about it helping you to step back and be a bit less emotional about it. Focus, there's the importance potentially, enables you to come up with some solutions or focus some actions, organize your thoughts, give you a bit more clarity. I'm liking that one, Rachel, because it sounds like the advert for the session. It gave me space to reflect and think about how to progress in the best way. Yeah, it very much does. Quite often, you already know you need to take action, but it clarifies or solidifies that when you get a bit of coaching. And in an ideal world, the coaching is in a relationship with somebody else, and we're going to look at how to do that well in a second, and then we're going to even have an experience of doing that with someone else. You know, when someone else can help you by listening effectively and by helping you to structure your thoughts, it can help you, you know, to prioritize or to be more resolute about moving forwards with your issue. I am going to be sharing with you, by the way, the questions that I used in that exercise, just in case you want to do that with your teams or anything. But we'll also be sharing some resources that have got other questions that can be useful coaching questions. But thank you so much for spending 15 minutes patiently thinking about your issue. Now what we're going to do is move on and think a little bit more about what we need for good coaching and how to coach. And this is coaching when your friend or family member or colleague comes to you, you know, with an issue, a problem, a challenge, or a goal that they feel that they're not really managing to work towards. We can help them. And the key things that we need to help them really well, and we're going to try some of these things a little bit later in the call, We need to be good at listening. You know, we need to listen really well and carefully, hopefully without interrupting them. And sometimes it can really help the person if we reflect back and summarize what we've heard so far, because that helps them to clarify their thinking, in the same way that writing it down can in that exercise. When we ask them questions, as I was asking you questions, hopefully they're open, they're positive, they're solution focused questions, and we're going to be giving you questions to use, then that can help them, you know, to structure their thoughts and think about what they're going to do in a resourceful and positive way. We might also sometimes give them feedback. We might share observations. We might question their thinking if their thinking seems to be a bit flawed, or question their assumptions. We might notice things, you know, we might say, oh, when you talk about doing option X, you seem really excited, but when you talk about doing option Y, not so much. What could that be about? You know, we can give feedback. We're not going to be looking at how to do that on this short call, but that could be a component of the coaching conversation. And so, as well as being good at listening, good at questioning, good at sharing feedback, observational feedback, in a positive way, what we also probably need is some sort of flexible model in our minds to help us keep the conversation on track and stop it from just going round in circles, you know, or rather than being a constructive session that helps someone, being just more of a moaning session or a whinging session, for example. So they're the things that we need. And I'm going to share with you now one or two of my thoughts on listening and questioning. And I'm going to share with you, you might be familiar with it already, the GROW model, the theory behind it and how it works. And then I'm going to give you some questions to use and an opportunity to go into pairs and coach each other. So I'm just saying that up front, and maybe it's makes you think that it's kind of worth taking a little bit of notice. So that you can be a good coach when you go off and do it with your partner. So the first skill that I've mentioned and talked about is this skill of listening actively. And I think probably the most important two things to think about when you're listening are, the first one's the kind of obvious one that everybody thinks of: attention. To what extent are you focused on the coachee? So you're not, you know, doing your emails or thinking about another issue at the same time. You're giving them as much attention as you can. And that's kind of fairly obvious. But what's a little bit more interesting is to really have good active listening that's kind of supercharged and helps the person even more. It's important to think about your intention as well as giving someone your full attention. You know, so what are you listening for? Is it constructive, your intention? Are you trying to support them, to challenge them? Ideally in coaching, we want to be, you know, giving unconditional positive regard, being totally on their agenda, really listening to them. And we don't want to be listening to try and solve their problems necessarily or give them advice, you know. We don't want to be listening just for a gap for us to put in and tell our, you know, funny anecdote or story that we think will help them. We want to be listening, you know, in an open and curious and supportive way, hopefully. So one of the things that you can do when somebody comes to you with an issue or problem is, yes, think, how am I going to reduce distractions so that I can give them my attention, but also think about, right, how do I intend to listen? What can be my constructive intention for this conversation? And then what's good is that you will be able to bring yourself back to that if you find your attention wandering. So we're going to listen really effectively, hopefully. And what we're also going to do is potentially ask a few questions. Now, I'm going to make this easy for you because I'm going to give you a bank of questions that you can ask your partner. But it's just worth thinking a little bit. Often, you know, people say, oh, ask some good open questions. And that's absolutely true. But what do we mean by an open question? And when we think about open questions, we often think about Rudyard Kipling's poem. He keeps 6 honest serving men who taught him all he knew. Their names were what and when and why and where and how and who. And here they are. But in terms of those as question starters, there is a little bit of a hierarchy. So at the bottom of the hierarchy, we've got when, who, and where. And to a large extent, these are actually a lot more closed. They're useful for when you're really trying to get to the bottom and understand an issue or problem, but not as useful when you're trying to help somebody develop and achieve their goals. So here's an example. When did you do that Champs collaborative coaching thing? Friday morning. Who did you do it with? Shirley. Where did you do it? From my living room. So those are what I like to call lower order open questions, in that they are giving you limited specific information rather than being more open and expansive. The most open and expansive question starters are usually what and how. So you will notice, I could count them, but a lot of the questions that I asked you in the silent coaching exercise start with what or how. I'm just looking at them and I'd say the vast majority begin with what, actually. So, you know, when a friend comes to you with a challenge and they sort of pause and they seem to not know what to say next, and you decide you want to ask them a question, what would be a good starter to potentially have on your lips? Now, we've also got why, which on purpose I've put in the top part of the triangle in the pointy bit, because it can be perceived as a little bit spiky. You know, it depends on your relationship with the person. But when you say, why did you do that? You know, they could feel a little bit defensive, especially in a work context, I think, where it alludes to, you know, potentially something that led to a mistake or a problem. So if you want to ask why in a coaching supportive situation, I would really recommend reframing that as a what or a how question. So you might be able to say, for example, what led to you making that decision? In a neutral and open and curious way. Or you might say, how did you come to make that decision, for example? And that will be a little bit gentler. Other starters, I mean, I had a few that were, you know, imagine or if, you know, some kind of hypothetical questions as well, which can be quite good. And for any of you that are expert interviewers, you'll be really used to asking questions like, tell me a bit more about, or explain or describe. And sometimes that they can be good for going a little bit deeper and probing. So in the exercise that we're going to do together, we are looking for you to listen really carefully, give us as much attention as you can, and have a positive intention. And we are looking for you to ask open questions, particularly starting with what and how. And then the only other thing that you're going to need for this coaching session really is a useful structure. And we're going to use the GROW model, which I bet many of you have heard of. I can't see many cameras actually at the moment, but it'd be good to do a nod or an eye if an eye in the text if you are familiar with the model. But this model gives you a useful structure, and it's the model that I used in the silent coaching exercise. So hopefully will be useful. Now let's have a little think about why this is a useful model and how to use it. So in the first part of the conversation, what we're going to be doing is focusing on the goal. And that's what we did. You know, I was asking you about what you're trying to achieve, what success would look and feel like, what you really want. So, you know, this is in line with Stephen Covey, if you remember his work from the 90s, still really good, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Begin with the end in mind. It's always good, isn't it, on any kind of journey to think what's the destination. So our aim here is for you to enable your coachee to be clear about what they are trying to achieve. So in practice, what does that look like? You need to agree the topic for discussion right at the start. You know, what are we here to talk about? What's the problem or the issue or whatever? You want to agree a specific objective or focus for the session, you know, like where do we want to get to by the end of this 15 minutes or half an hour or an hour? And there might be a longer term aim as well, you know, if appropriate, because somebody might say, you know, my long term aim is to get much, much better at doing presentations, for example. But in the short term, I want to talk about the presentation that I'm doing to the board next Tuesday. And by the end of the session, I want to have a bit of a clearer plan about how I'm going to set myself up for success and do that well. But what's important is by the end of the first part of the conversation, we're really clear about what the goal is, what the aim is, what the objective is, whatever you want to call it. Now, there's going to be a link for you to use these questions as a reference when you're in your coaching session, and you can use them, you know, forever after this workshop as well. These questions come from the best book, in my opinion, on coaching, Coaching for Performance by John Whitmore. And so here's some examples of the kind of things you can ask in this first section around the goal. You know, what do you want to achieve? What do you want to get out of the conversation? You might ask them about why it's important to them to build up a bit of motivation towards that goal. You might ask them about how challenging it is. There may be some intermediate steps to achieving the goal. You know, it might be a really big goal, like I want to become the chief exec of the organization, and there might be, you know, they might be early on in their career, and there might be a number of steps that they need to take before they could potentially achieve that goal. We can ask them questions. Sometimes people, when they come with an issue or challenge, are a bit stuck in the problem and are talking a lot about the problem. You know, they might be saying, oh, my relationship with this person, it's a nightmare, it's not going well. And you can ask them questions like, what would you like to be happening that's not happening now? Or how would you like things to be different from how they are now? They're good questions for helping them focus a bit more on what they do want rather than what they don't want. And we've got a hypothetical question here about granting a wish. And we can also ask them questions about the value. You know, sometimes people say they want to achieve a particular thing, but you can tell by their body language and the way that they're talking about it that they're not that committed or that bothered. And it can still be useful, you know, to have a coaching session where people are like, well, I thought I wanted to do this, but now that I've explored it, thought about it, clarified my thinking on it, I don't think I do. And that's fine. We're still helping them. Okay. Do feel free to interrupt me with any questions. But now we're going to think about the next stage of the model, which is the reality stage. What is happening now? And it's probably worth saying that sometimes these two parts of the model do need to be reversed or get a little bit mixed up, because sometimes once you've discussed reality, it kind of changes slightly what they want the goal to be. Or sometimes people come to you and they're so sort of steeped in the problem that they can't talk about their goals until they feel that you've listened and empathized in terms of where they're at the moment. But it's so important to have a clear contrast between where they are versus where they want to go. Otherwise, we can't start on the journey. So, you know, it's a bit like any journey. if you look at a map, you know, and you say, I want to go to the seaside, or I want to go to the pier, and that's your destination, to plot your journey, it's impossible unless you find that big black arrow that says you are here. So what we want to do by the end of these 2 stages is help the person have a really clear idea in their head, the gap between where they are and where they want to get to. So in this section, we're asking them questions about what's happening now in order to develop their awareness of reality, because 2 things we're really trying to do as a coach: encourage self-awareness and encourage self-responsibility. And this part is very much about self-awareness. So we're inviting them to self-assess. Where are they now? What are they good at? What are they not so good at? What will be challenging? We might offer feedback or examples. We might avoid or check assumptions. We might discard irrelevant history too. You know, they might say, you know, I've never been good at presentations. And we might say, you know, does that mean that you couldn't be good at presentations in the future? You could challenge that. They might say, I think it all stems to, you know, when I wet myself in assembly when I was 5 or something like that. And we could discard that irrelevant history and say, that probably won't happen on Tuesday when you're presenting to the board. So let's focus on what we need to focus on. So here are some of the kinds of questions we can ask. And this is, in a way, a lot of these questions will come naturally to you. You know, you ask someone what's happening at the moment, what's their experience of similar situations, but we're going to make sure that there aren't too many assumptions and too much flawed thinking in there. So we're going to ask, you know, we're going to drill down a bit and say, how do you know this is accurate? You know, they might say, oh, I'm sure this person doesn't like me because they never look at me, for example. And you might say, why else might they not meet your eye? Or we might say, how does this person not looking at you mean that they don't like you? So we want to get to increase the self-awareness and always be getting the coachee to be thinking about things as positively and resourcefully as they actually can. So when does this happen? How often does this happen? What have you tried so far? These are all things to explore in the reality phase. Okay, so next, you'll be glad that there's only 4 phases. Options. This is the section where you are helping them to think about what they might do to start closing the gap between where they are now and where they want to get to. And ideally with this, it's to start with quantity rather than quality. So we want them to generate as broad a list of options as we possibly can. In the silent coaching exercise, I asked you, you know, what options you might have in a few different ways. What options, what else, if you had no constraints, if you had a wise friend, if your best friend were in this situation. And they're just all to encourage you to cover a fuller range of options than you might do otherwise. Sometimes people have a tendency to just think of the first possible solution and go with that. And we don't want that to happen necessarily. So we're going to mainly invite suggestions from them. You know, if they come up with an idea, they're more likely engaged and committed to that than if we suggest it. So where possible, get as many options from them as you can. And then you might say, oh, would you like an idea or 2 from me if you've got one? But don't feel any pressure, you know, to have any or come up with any. You'll be helping them just by getting them to think through the issue, as we hopefully proved in the first exercise, because I had no idea what any of you were focusing on. We might in this stage as well start to think about some of the pros and cons. You know, first of all, be kind of imaginative and then think, right, which ones of these might be feasible or practical? So here's some good questions. What could you do? What options? What else? We've got the hypothetical questions that, you know, you have to use your judgment about whether these are appropriate for the situation and the person or whether they're going to break rapport. But we then might start to think about the options that are the most practical or likely to give them the most satisfaction or likely to make the most progress towards the goal. And then finally, in our conversations, we're going to have a look at the final part of the model, will. And that kind of stands for what will you do, but also what's your level of will or motivation or interest in doing this. And in this final section of the conversation, the aim is to help them commit to action so that they go away determined to do something, you know, to make some progress from the reality towards the goal. So in this section, you're helping them to choose what they're actually going to do. You're looking at possible obstacles, things that might get in the way. You're looking at help and support that they might need, and you're encouraging them to be specific about what they're going to do and define timing. I wouldn't recommend saying, how can you make your actions smart or your goals smart or anything, just because I think we hear that acronym quite a lot and it might annoy them, but we can be more subtle and use questions to make sure, you know, that they are being specific and they are defining timing. And then finally, we've got a set of questions that might support you here. So what will you do? What are the next steps? How might these actions meet your original needs? What might you do to sabotage the plan? If you've got good rapport with the person, then you can ask them about, you know, how they might get in the way. You might want to try and raise motivation a little bit by getting them to think through the consequences of success or failure. If you do take these actions, what will that give you? If you just carry on doing nothing and ignore the problem, what will happen? And then we did a bit of scaling, didn't we, at the end of our silent coaching. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you? Or you might want to ask how committed or how motivated, whatever you think is appropriate at the time. Okay, so you'll be pleased to know I'm not just sending you off, you know, with no help and support, but ideally what we're going to do is go into some breakout rooms in pairs and practice using the GROW model. And there you can see a link to some coaching questions that are going to help you. And I'm also going to put that link in the chat for you again, because you are going to support each other with an issue using the GROW model with the support of these questions. So there they are. You can click that link and then you'll have them on your computer. Now, in a moment, we're going to go into the breakout rooms to listen, to question, and to hopefully keep our partner on track and enable them to feel like they've moved forwards as part of the conversation. I would recommend choosing a work-related topic to discuss, and you can always pick up the conversation afterwards with your line manager if you want to. And it could be the same issue that you looked at in the silent coaching exercise, or it could be a different one. But you are also, when we send you off into breakout rooms, welcome to leave if you don't want to practice some of the skills. But I think this will be the most useful part. So one of you decides to be the coach and practice your skills. One of you decides to be the coachee and get some support with your issue. And you do that for the whole 15 minutes. But if the problem turns out to be really light and quickly solved and resolved, you can always swap over in that 15-minute period. If you're coaching a team, you know, if you're getting your team together and you're going, well, this is where we'd like to be, this is our goal, you know, I don't know, we want to have really happy customers, for example, and at the moment we've got more complaints, then you can use growth questions, team questions, to explore what you're trying to achieve, where you're at now, all your ideas for closing the gap between the current reality and the future. So that's just a useful resource that you can go to and use anytime if you want to.